My daughter Sarah, the child I had raised with hands that often ached from honest labor and a heart that knew no bounds in its capacity for love, stood in the doorway of the home I had helped her buy. My worn suitcase at her feet like a piece of discarded luggage. "You're holding us back, Mom," she'd said, her voice not unkind, not intentionally cruel, but imbued with a cool, pragmatic finality that was far more devastating. "Mark and I, we need to simplify, streamline, and your presence here, well, it's just not part of that equation anymore. It's time for you to move out." Holding them back. Me, her mother, the woman who had sacrificed her own small dreams, her own meager comforts, to ensure Sarah had every opportunity, every advantage I could possibly provide. The woman who, for the past 3 years, since her own Mark had been downsized from his fancy corporate job, had quietly, uncomplainingly become their unpaid nanny, cook, laundress, and it now seemed their primary financial buffer, my modest pension, mysteriously dwindling each month to cover their unexpected expenses. They thought my silence then, the way I simply stared at my suitcase, a lifetime of carefully hoarded memories and threadbare essentials crammed into its faded floral confines, was a sign of my senility, my meek acceptance of their callous decree. They didn't see the slow, seismic shift occurring within me, the crumbling of a lifetime of maternal illusions, the hardening of a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. They didn't understand that while they were streamlining me out of their lives, I was about to streamline them out of something far more significant, something they had so arrogantly, so foolishly assumed was their birthright, my legacy, my final word. This is the story of how a discarded suitcase became the catalyst for a mother's quiet, but utterly devastating reclamation of her own worth, and how moving out became the first step towards a freedom I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Now let me tell you what really happened. How the American dream, the one I'd so diligently pursued for my daughter, curdled into a nightmare of entitlement and ingratitude, and how one final brutal act of dismissal finally, blessedly set me free. It hadn't always been this way, this cold, transactional dynamic. I remembered Sarah as a little girl with pigtails the color of sunshine, and a laugh that could melt the sternest heart. My own Daniel, her father, a good man, a hard-working man, had been taken from us too soon, a factory accident leaving me a young widow with a 6-year-old daughter to raise, and a mountain of worries that threatened to bury me. But I'd persevered. I'd worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day, waitressing in a dingy diner by night, my body often aching with a fatigue so profound it felt like a physical illness. But Sarah's smile, her small hand tucked trustingly in mine, her whispered, "I love you, Mommy," before she drifted off to sleep in our tiny rented apartment. That was my fuel, my reason for enduring. I'd made sure she had everything she needed, if not always everything she wanted. New shoes, even if mine were worn thin, school books, even if it meant skipping a meal myself, a warm, safe home filled with love, if not with material luxuries. I'd attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective pride at her small achievements, her growing confidence. She was a bright girl, ambitious, with dreams that stretched far beyond the confines of our working-class neighborhood in a fading Ohio steel town. I encouraged those dreams, fanned their flames, even when they seemed impossibly out of reach. When she met Mark, a young man with a smooth tongue, a sharp suit, and an equally sharp eye for the main chance, I had harbored my reservations. He was slick, too polished. His ambition felt less like a driving force for creation and more like a hunger for acquisition. But Sarah was smitten. He represented everything she craved: sophistication, success, a life far removed from the make-do-and-mend realities of her childhood. And I, wanting only her happiness, had welcomed him into our small, imperfect family, trying to ignore the faint, persistent unease that his presence always seemed to evoke in me. Their wedding, a modest affair I'd helped finance by taking on extra cleaning shifts, had been a bittersweet day. My little girl, all grown up, embarking on a new life. I'd hoped Mark would cherish her, protect her, love her with the same fierce devotion Daniel had shown me. But as the years passed, as their careers took off, As they moved into a larger, more impressive house in a more affluent suburb, a subtle shift occurred. Sarah, once so warm, so affectionate, became cooler, more distant, more like Mark. Her visits to my small apartment became less frequent, her calls shorter, her conversation increasingly focused on their achievements, their possessions, their ever-expanding social circle. I became, I sensed, a slightly embarrassing reminder of a past she was eager to leave behind. The request for me to move in with them came 3 years ago, shortly after the birth of their second child, little Emily. Their eldest, Ben, was a boisterous, demanding toddler. Mark had just been restructured out of his high-paying executive position, his severance package, though substantial, apparently not enough to cover their extravagant lifestyle and the crippling cost of full-time childcare. "Mom," Sarah had said, her voice laced with that familiar, carefully calibrated mixture of filial concern and pragmatic appeal, "we were wondering, with Mark at home now, and Emily just a newborn, it's all a bit overwhelming. And you, all alone in that little apartment. It worries us. Perhaps you could come and stay with us? Just for a while? Help us out with the children? It would be such a load off our minds, and you'd have company, a proper family around you again. A proper family." The words at the time had resonated with a deep, unspoken longing within me. My solitude, since Daniel's passing, had often been a heavy cloak. The thought of being needed, of being part of a bustling, youthful household, of having my grandchildren's laughter fill my days, was an irresistible lure. And so, I had agreed. I'd given up my small, rent-controlled apartment, the repository of so many precious memories, and moved into their spacious, impersonal guest room. A room that, despite its designer wallpaper and ensuite bathroom, never quite felt like home. The helping out part of the arrangement quickly, almost imperceptibly, morphed into full-time, unpaid, and largely unacknowledged domestic servitude. My days in Sarah and Mark's household soon fell into a relentless, exhausting pattern. I was up before dawn, preparing breakfast for Ben, a whirlwind of toddler energy who demanded constant attention. Then came Emily, a colicky, fretful infant, whose cries often seemed to pierce through the very fabric of my being, while Sarah and Mark, after Mark's initial period of readjustment, which seemed to involve a lot of golf and networking lunches, both threw themselves back into the pursuit of new, equally demanding career opportunities. I became the de facto nanny, cook, laundress, and general household manager. My life was no longer my own. It was a series of tasks dictated by their schedule, their needs, their convenience. My own small pension, which I had initially offered to contribute towards household expenses while Mark was between jobs, somehow became their primary source of grocery money, of utility bill payments, of the little extras, designer baby clothes for Emily, expensive organic snacks for Ben, subscriptions to glossy parenting magazines for Sarah, that their own increasingly strained finances could no longer accommodate. They never asked. They simply assume. My bank card, which Sarah had helpfully offered to keep safe for me, was used with an alarming and ever-increasing frequency. When I'd tentatively inquire about the dwindling balance, Sarah would offer a vague, dismissive, "Oh, it's just the cost of things, Mom. Everything's so expensive these days. Don't worry your head about it. We're managing." Managing. Yes, they were managing, quite effectively, to deplete my life savings, my security, my peace of mind. My own needs, my own desires, were of course entirely irrelevant. My request for a small sum to repair my old failing spectacles was met with a sigh from Sarah about the unexpected cost of Ben's new karate lessons. My tentative suggestion that I might enjoy an afternoon off to visit my old friend Martha, who was recovering from a nasty fall, was greeted with a sharp reminder from Mark about the importance of consistency in the children's routine. I was trapped, a prisoner in their beautiful, modern, and increasingly oppressive home, a prisoner of my own maternal love, my own ingrained sense of duty, my own foolish, enduring hope that one day they would see me, appreciate me, value me, not just as a convenient, unpaid utility, but as their mother, their grandmother, a woman who deserved, at the very least, a modicum of respect, of kindness. The children, Ben and Emily, were my only solace, my only joy. Their innocent affection, their unquestioning love, was the one thing that kept me going, the one fragile thread connecting me to a sense of purpose, of belonging. I'd read them stories, sing them songs, wipe their tears, celebrate their small everyday triumphs. In their bright, uncomplicated eyes, I was not Mom's mom, the slightly embarrassing, increasingly burdensome old lady. I was Grandma, their grandma, and that for a time was enough. But even that small comfort began to be eroded by Sarah and Mark's growing impatience, their subtle, and not so subtle, attempts to marginalize my role, to diminish my connection with the children. My old-fashioned methods of discipline were questioned. My unhealthy home-baked treats were replaced by expensive, sugar-free organic alternatives. My stories, the ones I'd told Sarah as a child, the ones she had loved, were now deemed too scary or not developmentally appropriate. I was being slowly, systematically, edited out of their lives, my presence tolerated only as long as I remained a silent, compliant, and above all, useful cog in their domestic machine. The holding us back comment, when it finally came, was not a surprise. It was merely the inevitable verbal articulation of an attitude that had been conveyed in 1,000 small, unspoken ways for months, for years. It happened on a Tuesday. Mark had apparently received a fabulous job offer in another city, a game changer that would require them to relocate. The news was delivered not with excitement, but with a strange, almost furtive anxiety. They were in the kitchen, their voices low, confidential. I was in the adjoining sunroom, ostensibly reading to Emily, but my ears, sharpened by years of deciphering their coded conversations, were tuned to their every word. "But what about your mother?" Mark was saying, his voice a low rumble. "We can't exactly pack her up and take her with us, can we? It's a smaller house, Sarah, and frankly, with this new job, the entertaining we'll need to do, her presence would be awkward." Awkward. That was the word he used. Not inconvenient, not difficult, awkward. As if I were a piece of mismatched furniture, a social liability. Sarah's reply was a sigh, a sound of weary exasperation. "I know, Mark, I know, but what are we supposed to do? She has nowhere else to go. And she's useful with the children. Useful. Not loved, not cherished. Useful. Useful, yes," Mark conceded. "But also, limiting. She's holding us back, Sarah, from the life we could have, the life we deserve. We need to streamline, simplify. And your mother, bless her, is anything but simple, holding us back, streamline, simplify." The words, so cold, so corporate, so utterly devoid of any human warmth, any familial affection, echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition of what was to come. And then, later that week, the suitcase, my suitcase, packed not by me, but by Sarah, placed, with a brutal symbolic finality, at my feet. "It's time for you to move out, Mom." The end of a chapter. The beginning of what? I didn't know. All I knew was that the love I had given so freely, so unconditionally, had been met not with gratitude, but with a callous, pragmatic, and ultimately unforgivable dismissal. The shock of Sarah's words, "You're holding us back, Mom. It's time for you to move out," was a physical blow, stealing my breath, leaving me momentarily paralyzed, my mind a chaotic whirl of disbelief and a dawning terrible pain. My suitcase, that faded floral relic of a happier past, sat at my feet, a mute testament to my sudden brutal dispossession. Move out. To where? My small apartment, my sanctuary, had been relinquished years ago, its contents sold or given away, its key returned. My savings, my modest security, had been systematically plundered to fund their ambitions, their lifestyle, their casual, unthinking greed. I had quite literally nowhere to go. Sarah, perhaps sensing the depth of my shock, the unspoken terror in my eyes, offered a small conciliatory gesture, a crumb of pragmatic compassion. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too brisk. "We've made arrangements. There's a lovely place, a senior living facility, just outside the city, the Golden Meadows retirement community. It's very nice. They have activities, companionship, 3 meals a day. You'll be well taken care of." Golden Meadows, the name itself sounded like a euphemism, a prettified facade for a place where old, inconvenient people were sent to quietly fade away, a place I had never, in my wildest nightmares, envisioned as my final destination. "But, Sarah," I stammered, my voice hoarse, "my things, my furniture, Arthur's books, my mother's china." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Mom, you won't need all that clutter. Golden Meadows provides fully furnished rooms. much more, streamlined. We'll sort through your things later, decide what's worth keeping, what can be donated. My life, my memories, my cherished possessions, reduced to clutter, to be donated. The casual cruelty of it, the utter lack of empathy, was breathtaking. Mark, who had been hovering in the background, a silent, uncomfortable spectator, now stepped forward, his expression a mixture of impatience and a feigned, unconvincing solicitude. "It really is for the best, Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth, persuasive. "You'll be much more comfortable there. Less stress for you. Less responsibility. Less responsibility for them," he meant. Less of a burden. Less of an awkward presence in their new, streamlined, upwardly mobile lives. I looked from his bland, handsome face to Sarah's, my daughter's, her expression a carefully constructed mask of filial concern that didn't quite conceal the flicker of relief, of triumph, in her eyes. And in that moment, something inside me, something I hadn't even realized, was still capable of breaking, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My love for Sarah, my boundless, unconditional maternal love, did not die, but it underwent a profound, irrevocable transformation. It became something else. Something colder, harder, more resilient. Something that understood, finally, that self-preservation was not a selfish act, but a necessary one. "When?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tears, the recriminations they had perhaps been expecting. "When do I have to move out?" Sarah and Mark exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. "Well," Sarah said, her voice a little too eager, "we were thinking tomorrow? The relocation company is coming for our things next week, and it would be much easier if you were settled before then. Tomorrow." They weren't just streamlining me out of their lives, they were expelling me with an almost indecent haste. There would be no time for goodbyes, no time for a last, lingering look at the home I had, however briefly, however foolishly, considered my own. No time to salvage more than the few, hastily chosen items Sarah had deemed appropriate for my new, diminished existence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the characterless guest room, my suitcase a silent reproach in the corner, and I thought about my life, about Daniel, about Sarah as a little girl, about the dreams I had once held for her, for us. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given, the trust I had so foolishly, so blindly bestowed, and I thought about Golden Meadows, a place of beige walls, of regimented routines, of polite, impersonal care, a place where I would be safe, comfortable, and utterly devastatingly alone. But as the first pale light of dawn crept through the inopia curtains, a new thought, a small defiant spark, began to ignite within the ashes of my despair. They thought they could discard me like a piece of old, unwanted furniture. They thought they could erase me from their lives, from their future, from their inheritance. They were wrong. I might be old, I might be heartbroken, but I was not yet defeated. My legacy, my final word, was still mine to write, and it would be a testament not to their cruelty, but to my own quiet, unyielding, and ultimately triumphant strength. The suitcase by the door was not an ending. It was, I realized with a sudden fierce clarity, a beginning. The move to Golden Meadows was a blur of institutional efficiency and a profound, soul-crushing impersonality. Sarah and Mark, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of solicitous concern, delivered me to the imposing, red brick entrance, my single faded floral suitcase, my only companion. There were forms to be signed, questions to be answered, a brief perfunctory tour of the facilities, the communal dining room with its clatter of cutlery and its faint, pervasive scent of overcooked vegetables, the activities lounge with its unwatched television and its scattering of listless elderly residents, the small, sterile room that was to be my new home. "Isn't it lovely, Mom?" Sarah had chirped, her voice a little too bright, a little too brittle. "So secure. You'll make lots of new friends here." Mark had nodded his agreement, his gaze already drifting towards the exit, his mind, I suspected, already back on his game-changing job offer, his new, streamlined, mother-free life. I had merely nodded, my own voice a choked whisper. What was there to say? The deed was done. The betrayal was complete. They left quickly, a hurried peck on my cheek from Sarah, a brief, awkward handshake from Mark. No promises of visits, no heartfelt expressions of love or regret. Just a palpable, almost audible sigh of relief as they walked out the door, leaving me alone in my new beige and utterly desolate reality. The first few weeks at Golden Meadows were a study in quiet despair. My room, though clean and functional, felt like a prison cell. The routines were rigid, the food bland, the companionship, such as it was, largely confined to polite, superficial exchanges with other residents, most of whom seemed as lost, as adrift, as I was. I missed my home, my garden, the familiar comfort of my own things. I missed Ben and Emily, their laughter, their sticky hugs, their innocent, unconditional love, with an ache so profound it felt like a physical illness. I tried to engage. I attended the weekly bingo game, my mind a million miles away. I sat through the stultifying current events discussions. My contributions, when I dared to offer them, met with polite incomprehension or a condescending pat on the hand. I realized, invisible. A forgotten old woman, warehoused, out of sight, out of mind. But even in the depths of my despair, a small, stubborn spark of defiance began to flicker. I would not succumb. I would not fade away into beige obscurity. I was Eleanor Vance, Daniel's Eleanor, Sarah's mother, Ben and Emily's grandmother. I had survived loss, hardship, betrayal. I would survive this. My first act of quiet rebellion was to refuse to participate in the mandatory sing-along sessions, which featured a repertoire of relentlessly cheerful, mind-numbingly repetitive nursery rhymes. Instead, I would retreat to my room with a book, usually a tattered copy of Jane Austen or one of the Bronte sisters, finding solace and a surprising degree of strength in their tales of resilient, intelligent women navigating worlds that often sought to diminish them. My second act of rebellion was to befriend Martha, a woman whose sharp wit and even sharper tongue had earned her a reputation as Golden Meadows' resident curmudgeon. Martha, a retired history professor with a formidable intellect and a healthy disdain for institutionalized pleasantries, saw through my polite facade with an unnerving acuity. "Don't let them grind you down, Eleanor," she'd said one afternoon, cornering me in the drab little library. "This place, it's designed to induce a state of benign senility. Resist, my dear. Resist." Martha became my ally, my confidante, my co-conspirator in quiet acts of defiance. We'd share illicit cups of real coffee, smuggled in by her long-suffering but equally rebellious nephew. We'd engage in subversive, whispered critiques of the latest inanities from the activities director. We'd even, on one memorable occasion, accidentally reprogrammed the communal television to broadcast a Wagnerian opera cycle instead of the usual mind-numbing game shows, much to the consternation of the staff and the bewildered delight of a few of the more adventurous residents. It was during one of our clandestine coffee sessions that Martha, with her characteristic bluntness, broached the subject that had been hovering, unspoken, at the back of my own mind. "So, Eleanor," she said, her gaze direct, "what about your affairs? Your will? Have you adjusted it to reflect current realities?" I had, of course, thought about it. The will I had made years ago, leaving everything to Sarah, now felt like a cruel joke, a testament to my own naivety, my own foolish, unreciprocated, maternal devotion. But the thought of engaging with lawyers, of revisiting that painful terrain, had felt overwhelming, an emotional burden too heavy to bear. I haven't, Martha," I admitted, my voice low. "It all seems so complicated, and frankly, after everything, I just don't have the fight left in me." Martha snorted, a sound of profound, impatient disapproval. "Nonsense, Eleanor. Of course you have the fight left in you. You're a Vance, aren't you? We Vances don't go down without a bloody good scrap. And this isn't just about fighting, it's about justice. It's about ensuring your legacy, your final word, reflects your true worth, not their despicable grasping entitlement." Her words, so fierce, so unequivocal, fanned that small flickering spark of defiance within me into a steady burning flame. She was right. My will was my final testament, and it would not be a reward for cruelty, for betrayal, for a daughter who had so casually, so brutally, discarded her own mother. That afternoon, with Martha's enthusiastic assistance, I made a phone call to Mr. Henderson, my old family solicitor, a man of quiet integrity and unwavering discretion. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice clear, steady, "it's Eleanor Vance. I believe it's time we had a conversation about updating my affairs." The dead weight, it seemed, was about to become a rather significant and entirely unexpected force to be reckoned with. The process of revising my will, with Mr. Henderson's calm, professional guidance, and Martha's spirited, often highly entertaining, moral support, was surprisingly cathartic. It felt like a reclaiming of my own narrative, a final definitive assertion of my own agency. My previous will, a simple document leaving everything to Sarah, was unceremoniously consigned to the shredder. In its place, a new testament began to take shape, one that reflected not the bitter sting of betrayal, but a deeper, more considered understanding of what truly mattered, of where my legacy could best serve the values I held dear. I thought long and hard about Ben and Emily. They were innocent in all of this, my precious grandchildren, victims, in their own way, of their parents' selfishness and myopia. I could not, would not, punish them for the sins of their mother. Mr. Henderson, with his customary wisdom, suggested a trust, an educational fund to be managed by an independent, court-appointed trustee, ensuring that my grandchildren would have the resources for a good education, a solid start in life, a gift from the grandmother their mother had tried so hard to erase from their lives. It felt right, a way to express my enduring love for them, without rewarding Sarah and Mark's deplorable behavior. For the remainder of my estate, the modest house in Ohio which, I discovered with a surge of righteous anger, Sarah and Mark had quietly, illegally transferred into their own names, using a forged power of attorney, a matter Mr. Henderson assured me he would pursue with the full, unmitigated rigor of the law. My small savings, Daniel's pension benefits, I chose a different beneficiary, not a distant relative, not a favored charity, though those were options I considered. No, my decision was more personal, more direct, and I had to admit, imbued with a certain quiet, poetic justice. I decided to leave the bulk of my estate to Martha, my dear, curmudgeonly, fiercely loyal friend Martha, a woman who, like me, had known loss, hardship, disappointment, a woman who lived modestly on her own small pension, her days brightened by her books, her garden, her unwavering, if sometimes cantankerous, belief in the importance of fighting for what was right. A woman who had offered me not pity, but companionship, not judgment, but a fierce, unwavering support. A woman who had reminded me of my own strength, my own worth, when I had all but forgotten it. When I told Martha of my decision, her initial reaction was one of stunned, almost comical, disbelief. "Eleanor Vance," she'd exclaimed, her teacup rattling in its saucer. "Have you taken leave of your senses? Leave it all to me? An old opinionated biddy with a penchant for subversive literature and a garden full of unruly gnomes? Your daughter will have a fit. She'll contest it. She'll say I unduly influenced you." I had merely smiled. "Let her try, Martha. Mr. Henderson assures me the will shall be as watertight as a submarine, and as for undue influence, my dear, the only influence you have exerted is that of true, unwavering, and deeply cherished friendship. This isn't charity, Martha. It's gratitude, for showing an old, forgotten woman that she still mattered, that she still had a voice, that she still had a fight left in her." Martha had been silent for a long moment, her usually sharp features softened by an uncharacteristic and rather endearing flush of emotion. Then she'd reached across the small, cluttered table in her cozy living room and taken my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Well, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice a little hoarse, "if that's your final word on the matter, then who am I to argue? But you'd better believe, my dear friend, that those unruly gnomes of mine are going to have the best-dressed, most outrageously flamboyant garden party this side of the Ohio River when the time comes, and we shall toast your memory, your courage, your magnificent, bloody-minded, glorious defiance with the finest champagne your ill-gotten legacy can buy." We had both laughed then, a shared, joyful, slightly wicked laugh that echoed through the small, cluttered room, a laugh that felt like a liberation, a triumph, a final, defiant, two-fingered salute to Sarah, to Mark, to all the grasping, entitled, carelessly cruel people in the world. My legacy was secure, my final word was written, and it was a testament not to bitterness, but to the enduring, transformative power of friendship, of kindness, of a quiet, unshakable, and ultimately, gloriously, indomitable, human spirit. The suitcase by the door, once a symbol of my dispossession, now felt like a passport to a future, however brief, that was entirely, unequivocally my own. The legal battle to reclaim my Ohio home, and to untangle the Gordian knot of Sarah and Mark's financial machinations was, as Mr. Henderson had predicted, a protracted and often deeply unpleasant affair. They fought, of course, viciously. Their lawyer, a man whose smarmy demeanor and expensive suit seemed a perfect reflection of their own shallow values, employed every trick in the legal playbook: delays, obfuscations, character assassinations. They attempted to portray me as a senile, vindictive old woman, easily manipulated, mentally incompetent, a danger to myself and my own financial well-being. It was a deeply humiliating experience, having my life, my choices, my very sanity, picked apart, dissected and distorted in the cold, impersonal arena of a courtroom. But with Mr. Henderson's calm, unwavering guidance and Martha's fierce, often hilariously profane moral support, she attended every court session, a formidable knitting needle-wielding gorgon in the public gallery. Much to the consternation of Sarah and Mark's legal team, I persevered. The evidence of their financial exploitation, meticulously compiled by Mr. Henderson's diligent staff, was irrefutable. The forged power of attorney, the systematic draining of my accounts, the blatant misuse of my pension, it painted a damning picture of greed, deceit, and a profound, almost pathological sense of entitlement. Sarah, when forced to testify, was a study in tearful self-pitying evasion. She claimed ignorance, blamed Mark, portrayed herself as a loving, if perhaps naive daughter, overwhelmed by the pressures of modern life, merely trying to manage her aging mother's increasingly complex affairs. Her performance was, I had to admit, rather convincing, though I doubted it fooled the experienced, world-weary judge for a moment. Mark, in contrast, was belligerent, arrogant, his testimony a tissue of transparent lies and barely concealed contempt. He seemed genuinely bewildered that his right to his mother-in-law's assets was being questioned, his carefully constructed world of effortless privilege crumbling around him. The turning point, I believe, came when Mr. Henderson produced the original deed to my Ohio home, my name, Eleanor Vance, clearly, unequivocally stated as the sole legal owner. He then presented evidence of the fraudulent transfer of title, the forged signatures, the backdated documents, a clear, undeniable case of property theft. The judge, a woman of stern demeanor and a reputation for sharp intellect, listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. The judgment, when it was finally delivered after weeks of legal wrangling, was a decisive, if not entirely complete, victory. The fraudulent transfer of my home was overturned. Sarah and Mark were ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days. They were also found liable for a significant portion of the misappropriated funds, though Mr. Henderson cautioned me that recovering the full amount would likely be a long and arduous process, given their now considerably straitened financial circumstances. There was no triumphant fist-pumping, no whoops of elation, just a quiet, profound sense of relief. Of justice, however belated, however imperfect, finally painstakingly achieved. The question of what to do with the Ohio house, my home, now legally mine once more, weighed heavily on my mind. The thought of returning there, of living amidst the ghosts of so much pain, so much betrayal, was unbearable, but the thought of selling it, of severing that last tangible link to Daniel, to my past, was equally daunting. It was Martha, in her infinite, pragmatic wisdom, who offered the solution. "Donate it, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice firm. "Donate it to a cause that matters. Let it be a place of healing, of hope, not a monument to their despicable greed. Turn their poison into medicine." And so, I did. After much thought, much prayer, I decided to bequeath my Ohio home upon my passing, as stipulated in my new will, with Martha as my heir, and the educational trust for Ben and Emily still firmly in place, to a local organization that provided shelter and support for women and children fleeing domestic abuse, a haven, a place of safety, a new beginning. It felt right, a way to transform my own suffering into something positive, something that would offer solace, and perhaps a chance at a new life, to others who had known hardship, betrayal, fear. My legacy, I realized, was not just in the legal documents, in the disposition of my material possessions. It was in this choice, this act of quiet, defiant generosity, this turning of a weapon of betrayal into an instrument of healing. Sarah and Mark, I heard, did not vacate my Ohio home with grace. Their departure was a chaotic, ill-tempered affair, marked by recriminations, slammed doors, and a general air of resentful, self-inflicted victimhood. They left behind a trail of unpaid bills, a neglected garden, and a house that felt tainted. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that its new purpose, its future as a place of refuge, of hope, would eventually, inevitably, cleanse it of their toxic presence. As for me, I remained at Golden Meadows. It was not my dream home, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was safe, and with Martha as my neighbor, my friend, my co-conspirator, in navigating the often absurd landscape of institutionalized old age, it was, if not joyful, then at least bearable. And sometimes bearable, after a lifetime of storms, is a quiet, unassuming, and deeply cherished kind of peace. The final years of my life at Golden Meadows, with Martha as my irascible but deeply cherished companion, unfolded with a quiet, unassuming rhythm. The legal battles were over, the emotional dust had settled, and what remained was a fragile, hard-won peace. My days were filled with small, ordinary pleasures. Reading in the sun-drenched, if somewhat institutional, common room, tending the small collection of potted geraniums Martha had helped me establish on my windowsill, engaging in spirited, often hilariously cantankerous debates with Martha about everything from global politics to the lamentable decline in the quality of institutional custard. We were, as Martha often proclaimed with a theatrical sigh, two old battle axes rattling our sabers against the encroaching forces of beige conformity and bland nutrition. But beneath the gruff exterior, beneath the witty cynicism, there was a deep, abiding affection, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of late-life camaraderie, and a mutual disdain for organized shuffleboard tournaments. My health, never robust, continued its slow, inevitable decline. There were more frequent visits from the facility doctor, more adjustments to my medication, more days when the simple act of getting out of bed felt like a Herculean effort. But Martha was always there, a constant fussing, grumbling, and utterly indispensable presence. She'd bring me contraband cups of real coffee, filched from who knows where. She'd read to me when my eyesight grew too dim, her voice surprisingly gentle, bringing to life the heroines of Austen and the Brontes. She'd bully the staff, with a magnificent theatrical indignation, into providing me with an extra pillow, a warmer blanket, a less offensive variety of lukewarm soup. She was, in short, a treasure. A cantankerous, opinionated, fiercely loyal, and utterly irreplaceable treasure. Of Sarah and Mark, I heard very little. Their lives, it seemed, had continued on their downward trajectory of financial struggle and mutual acrimony. The occasional third-hand snippet of news, usually relayed with a certain grim satisfaction by one of Martha's less charitable acquaintances, painted a picture of a life stripped bare of its former gloss, its carefully constructed pretensions. They had, apparently, divorced. Mark, his game-changing career having spectacularly failed to materialize, was rumored to be working a low-level sales job, his ambition curdled into a bitter, resentful apathy. Sarah, her own career aspirations similarly thwarted, was reportedly struggling to make ends meet, her once fashionable wardrobe now conspicuously threadbare. I felt no triumph in their downfall, only a distant, weary sadness. They were the architects of their own misfortune, yes, but they were also, in a way, victims of their own shallow values, their own insatiable and ultimately self-destructive greed. My only lingering concern was for Ben and Emily. The educational trust was in place, their futures secured in that small practical way, but I yearned for them to know, to understand, the grandmother their parents had so effectively, so cruelly erased from their lives. I wrote them letters, long rambling letters, filled with stories of my own childhood, of Daniel, of their mother as a little girl. I didn't dwell on the recent unpleasantness, on the betrayals, the heartaches. I simply tried to paint a picture of a life lived, of a love that despite everything endured. I entrusted the letters to Mr. Henderson, with instructions that they be delivered to Ben and Emily when they reached adulthood, when they were old enough perhaps to understand, to forgive, to connect with the grandmother they had never truly known. It was a small, hopeful gesture, a message in a bottle, cast into the uncertain waters of the future. My final days were peaceful. Martha was by my side, of course, her hand, surprisingly soft, holding mine. There were no regrets, no unfinished business. My legacy, both material and emotional, was secure. My Ohio home would become a haven for those in need. My friendship with Martha would endure, a testament to the enduring power of late-life camaraderie. And Ben and Emily, my precious lost grandchildren, would one day perhaps read my words, and in them find a glimpse of the grandmother, the love they had been denied. As I closed my eyes for the final time, the scent of Martha's smuggled coffee and the faint familiar aroma of institutional floor polish mingling in the air, I felt not fear, not sadness, but a profound, unshakable sense of completion. I had lived, I had loved, I had fought, and I had, in my own quiet, determined way, won. The suitcase, that faded floral symbol of my initial despair, had indeed been a passport to a final chapter, filled not with bitterness, but with a quiet, resilient, and ultimately triumphant peace. The dead weight had found its final, and rather glorious, resting place,